Mark and Jenna had built almost 10 years of life together in Portland, their world revolving around their 7-year-old son, Liam. Mark, a hard-working contractor, spent long days on job sites, proud of providing for his family. Jenna excelled in her marketing career, balancing deadlines and motherhood with practiced grace. To anyone looking in, their marriage seemed solid, maybe a bit weary from the daily grind of work and parenting, but steady. That illusion shattered one ordinary evening. Mark came home earlier than usual, the house unusually quiet except for soft murmurs coming from the living room. When he stepped inside, he froze. Jenna sat close to her coworker, Chris, their posture too intimate, their laughter too hushed. The air between them carried a charge that left no room for doubt. Jenna jumped up, eyes wide, words tumbling out that Chris was just a colleague stopping by to discuss work. But her tone trembled, betraying panic more than innocence. Mark didn't argue. He simply nodded, walked upstairs, and let silence swallow him whole. Later that night, unable to shake the unease clawing at him, he checked her phone. The messages told the truth she hadn't. There were confessions, stolen moments, and a string of texts that stripped his trust bare. She had been having an affair. The betrayal struck him harder than any physical blow. His chest felt hollow as he confronted her, voice shaking but firm. "Pack your things," he said quietly. Jenna broke down, pleading that it had been a mistake born of loneliness, a lapse of judgment after years of feeling unseen. But Mark couldn't look past the fact that she had brought another man into their home, the same walls that held their sleeping child. His voice was steady when he repeated that she needed to leave. Jenna left that night, suitcase in hand, her sobs echoing down the driveway as rain began to fall. The next morning, Liam asked where Mommy was. Mark said she was staying with a friend for a while. It was the first of many partial truths he'd have to tell. Over the next few weeks, Jenna's texts flooded his phone, apologies, promises to change, desperate pleas for another chance, but Mark stopped responding. He buried his emotions under work and fatherhood. He woke early, packed lunches, helped with homework, went to soccer practices, read bedtime stories. On the surface, life looked normal. But inside, anger and grief churned like a storm he could barely contain. Nights were the hardest. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of laughter that weren't his. The betrayal replayed in loops, Chris's face, Jenna's panicked voice, the messages that had gutted him. He reached out to a lawyer, filing for divorce with quiet determination. His only goal was to protect Liam's stability and keep what dignity he had left. Months passed, and the quiet of his new life began to settle. Mornings were simpler. Evenings revolved around homework, dinner, and Liam's stories about school. Yet every so often the memory resurfaced, the look on Jenna's face, the way she flinched when he found out. Meanwhile, Jenna started therapy, cut all contact with Chris, and tried to show remorse through action. Her messages grew calmer, less about guilt, more about Liam. She asked about school, about his sleep, about how Mark was holding up. Their communication became strictly logistical, pickup times, parent-teacher conferences, doctor visits. Every exchange felt stiff but civil. Mark told himself that was enough. Still, some nights he found himself replaying their marriage, wondering where things had gone wrong. Had his long hours left her lonely? Had he stopped noticing the small things, the way she laughed, the way she needed him to simply be present? But every time empathy began to surface, the image of her betrayal crushed it. However neglected she might have felt, she had chosen to seat. Then one rainy evening, an unexpected knock rattled the door. Mark opened it to find Chris standing there, soaked, pale, eyes rimmed with regret. Rage surged through him instantly. Before Mark could speak, Chris blurted out that Jenna had ended things months ago, that he regretted everything, that he never meant to destroy a family. He said he'd fallen in love with her but realized too late the damage he'd done. Mark's jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Without a word he slammed, the door in his face. The encounter left him trembling, heart hammering, fury and grief colliding all over again. He didn't tell Jenna about it. There was nothing to say. Instead, that moment became a strange catalyst. It forced him to stop clinging to the past. He began focusing on moving forward. When the divorce papers were finalized, Jenna didn't contest a single term. Custody, finances, property, it all went exactly as Mark's lawyer had written it. Her silence felt like an acknowledgement of guilt, or maybe like penance. Life split cleanly in two. Mark's days became a rhythm of work, school drop-offs, and soccer games. Liam's laughter became the only sound that mattered. Jenna continued therapy, determined to rebuild herself, not to win Mark back, but to become the mother her son deserved. Eventually, they started joint counseling, not for reconciliation, but to learn how to co-parent without tearing each other apart. In those sessions, painful truths came to light. Jenna admitted she had felt invisible, like a ghost in her own marriage, while Mark admitted that his focus on providing had blinded him to her emotional needs. There were tears, silences, awkward apologies. Understanding grew between them, but forgiveness remained out of reach. They agreed on strict boundaries, total honesty, no personal talk, no mention of the affair. Their only shared goal was Liam's happiness. Over time, those boundaries built something unexpectedly stable, a cautious peace. Jenna showed up consistently. She never missed a game, never bailed on school events. She gave Mark space, proved reliability through small, steady actions. Slowly, Mark's raw anger began to fade. He didn't trust her, but he stopped hating her. At Liam's school play months later, they sat on opposite sides of the auditorium. When Liam stepped onto the stage, both smiled and clapped, their eyes meeting briefly in shared pride. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt something close to calm. Their marriage was gone, the trust shattered beyond repair. But something human remained, the shared love for their child. Life began to rebuild around that fragile foundation. Mark found solace in the ordinary. He started jogging again, fixing up the apartment, coaching Liam's soccer team. He even started reading at night, books he hadn't touched in years. Small things filled the empty spaces where anger used to live. Jenna, meanwhile, focused on growth. She earned a promotion, kept up with therapy, and learned to sit with her guilt instead of running from it. She didn't expect forgiveness, only hoped to earn respect. Chris became nothing more than a distant, bitter memory, a cautionary tale she carried quietly. That uninvited visit of his had unknowingly marked a turning point for both of them. It showed Mark that he could stay trapped in bitterness forever or start reclaiming his peace. He chose the latter. At Liam's next birthday, they stood apart again, smiling politely across the table as their son blew out his candles. The moment was bittersweet. The scars were still there, but so was something else, a shared strength born from surviving the worst together. Mark no longer loved Jenna, but he didn't despise her either. What remained was a steady, quiet understanding that people break, and sometimes they rebuild into something different. Not together, but parallel. From the ruins of betrayal, Mark built a new kind of life, not defined by what he'd lost, but by what he still had. His son's laughter, the calm of ordinary mornings, and the peace of knowing he had survived the storm. And maybe someday when Liam was older, he'd tell him the truth. Not the ugly details, but the lesson that even when love fails, decency doesn't have to. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep showing up, even when your heart still aches. By the time spring came around, the pain had dulled into memory. The mornings were filled with the sound of coffee brewing, sneakers squeaking on the floor, and Liam's chatter about school. Mark watched his boy grow stronger, kinder, unscarred by what had broken the adults around him. And though the nights could still get quiet, Mark finally learned to breathe in that silence, to let it mean peace rather than loneliness. Because in the end, life hadn't ended the night Jenna betrayed him. It had simply changed shape. And in its new form, stripped of illusions but grounded in truth, Mark finally found what he'd been searching for all along: peace, purpose, and the unwavering love of a father who refused to let heartbreak define him.